Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be talking about hearing and sound and things you can do to train your hearing to either reduce threat in your body. So we talk a lot in most of our videos about how the better the input is into your brain, the better the output is going to be. So just by hearing better, you will probably find that you're moving better. So definitely a good idea if you think it might be of use to you. Train your hearing for sure. The other side of this is I'm going to address a little bit about hearing related to hearing loss, because that's a big concern for a lot of people. There are things that we can do, but I do just want to insert a little caveat in this, in that when most people think about hearing loss, they think about hearing loss which arises from the damage to the cilia in the ear, in the cochlea. These are little hair cells that do not regenerate in the body. So once you lose these little hairs, if you're exposed to very loud noise for a very long period of time, and that causes damage to those cilia, at the moment we don't have any way of regenerating those. They don't regenerate naturally. I don't know of any drugs or anything like that that can cause them to regenerate. The solution there in most cases is that people go and get implants or hearing aids or things like that. And if your hearing has really degenerated to the point that you could use a hearing aid, I do recommend that that is something that you do, because of the links between hearing and things like memory, which could play an important role later on. So I'm going to be talking about things that you can do that might be able to help improve your hearing, as well as maybe reduce hearing loss. But please don't take this as this is going to cure anyone and everyone's hearing loss. It absolutely is not intended as such, and I don't believe that there is research out there at the minute, from what I can find, that would suggest otherwise. If you know of any, please do send it my way. I'd be very keen to read it. So, but really, when it comes to training hearing, when it comes to sound, actually what I want to emphasize is that part of losing your hearing is one aspect of it. There are many other aspects that are in play, many other factors that are in play, and it's quite possible that we could have neglected a bunch of those. So maybe we feel like we've lost quite a bit of our hearing. Now, it could be because the cilia is being damaged, and that is going to make things more difficult, but it could be also that there are other factors at play that if we strengthen those up, maybe the loss isn't as great as we thought. So that is the spirit at which I would like you to be approaching this, and let's get into it. So I'm going to try and keep this as short as I possibly can. There's a couple of things that I want to address. So number one is the components of hearing. So I just want to talk through what actually makes up, why do we have hearing, what's it for, and how does that work. Then we're just going to talk through the kind of 4 aspects that I think are worth looking at and worth trying to train. So these are tone, sensitivity, space, and discrimination. Okay, so let's get into it. Most importantly, we start with number 1, which is what are the components of hearing. What is hearing for? Hearing basically provides an awareness of the environment that isn't the subject of our direct focus. So our eyes deal with the stuff that we're paying attention to and that we might need to pay attention to very, very soon. As such, the eyes are really, really detailed. There's a lot of wiring goes into getting a really detailed and proper image for the eyes, and the brain processes it all to help us make better decisions. For the ears, it's about, well, what else is going on? Do I need to be aware of anything else in the environment? And because it's not part of our direct focus, it doesn't quite have that extensive level of neural wiring involved, but the reflexes involved are pretty quick. So the things our brain requires information on, it wants to know what else is around us, It wants to know where that stuff is. And then finally, whether or not it's going to react depends on how important the information is. So if you're just hearing background noise that isn't changing very much, it's going to pay very little attention to that, because if it hasn't been a danger up to this point, it's probably not likely to be unless something changes. If something sounds like it's really close to you, that is more worthy of your attention than something that's far away. And then there are specific sounds, really loud sounds like a bang are going to warrant more attention than quieter sounds. But maybe some quiet sounds, like if you hear a snake, for example, that might be a remembered sound that causes you to act quickly. So those are kind of what the brain cares about when it comes to taking in the audio information. Then finally, one of the things I said is, while it's not got a lot of wiring, when we do want to react to the sound information, the reflexes that we implement are very, very quick. So anytime there is a reflex, usually it's completely involuntary and it happens very, very fast. An example of this with the loud bang example is that people jump, you run up behind someone, scare them. Another example, if you try to focus on a target ahead of you and something loud happens or something unexpected happens on either side, there are reflexes that will kick in to try and draw your eyes over in that direction to see what's going on, and you will require a different part of your brain. The frontal cortex is going to have to inhibit that, so to say, no, I still want to focus on this target, do not look over there. So that's really the components on what your brain's trying to do when it's trying to hear. And this might beg the question, well, why would people lose their hearing in the first place? So obviously, if cells that can't regenerate are damaged, then that's going to have a big effect. But if I'm talking about strengthening other brain areas that maybe can be trained, why would the brain choose to reduce the hearing stimulus? And really, the answer to that is, well, the what, the where, and how important. If those things can't be ascertained well, so if it's hard for me to tell exactly what a sound is, it becomes less useful for my brain to rely on sound for that information. So it will just start blocking it out and ignoring it. If it can't tell where something's coming from, again, it becomes less and less useful for our survival. So we kind of get two options where we assume something's right next to us, we assume something's really dangerous, or we just, if we are constantly going through the world and actually we're hearing all these sounds, we can't discriminate between any of them, and nothing bad's ever happening, well, then the brain's just going to say, you know what, this is a lot of energy that I'm using on a system that isn't working quite so well. I'll take my chances with my other senses, so maybe touch, sight, smell. If I wasn't spending so much energy making this hearing system work so well, then I would probably be able to see better or smell better or do something else better. So that's kind of the theory that we're going with and working with here. So first thing that we're going to talk about in terms of training your hearing is training your ability to perceive tone. So that is whether you can hear a low pitch or a high pitch. That's the one most people are familiar with. You will lose your high frequency hearing just as you get older and older. That ability is going to degenerate. Again, partly that's due to the cilia cells that, or the cilia hairs that measure it. They get damaged much easier with the high frequencies, but partially also it's going to be through use. So when you don't hear that many high frequency pitches, actually it's not so necessary that you keep it up. You may be familiar in shopping malls. In some places they play super high frequency noises that teenagers that might be loitering can hear, and it's super uncomfortable, but most other adults cannot. And that's just an example of how those high frequencies will degrade over time. Now, obviously, if it degrades too much, that can be an issue, and one of the most common hearing issues that people come up against, is tinnitus. So, tinnitus can be caused by a number of things, but one of the really common things is it's like a hallucination. So, I'll give you a visual analogy of this to try and help describe it, but if I asked you to close your eyes and make it completely dark, so you put your hands over your eyes, don't let any light in at all, for many of you, you might actually experience not darkness, but just random blotches of colors, or for some people they can go into full-on hallucinations, especially if you leave it for long enough. In fact, that's the point of sensory deprivation chambers and things like that. And what's happening there is, once we take our vision away, our brain says, hang on, this is the most important thing for us for our survival. We should be seeing things, that we're going to struggle if not. And it starts just providing visual imagery that may or may not be useful. And usually it's super light. But as I said, for some people, especially if it goes on for a long time, in order for those nerve cells not to die out, the brain needs to activate them. So the brain will just make up, hey, imagine you're seeing some red light or some green light, or imagine you're seeing a shark or your bedroom, so that the occipital lobe that deals with your vision is forced to still work, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't require any oxygen, then those cells are going to die out. And a similar thing happens with tinnitus, is that if you're not hearing certain tones very often, and that could be because, again, those the hair cells have died out, so it's not possible for you to hear those tones, the brain says, hang on, if these neurons that detect these sounds are going to die soon if we don't feed them, so we're going to feed them artificially to try and keep them going. And I think that's really interesting, because it does bring up one sort of form of treatment for tinnitus, is that you can start playing. So if you can get some headphones, and if you're used to tinnitus at a particular pitch, what you do is you go looking for that pitch. Now, again, if the hair cells are completely damaged, you might struggle, because you're gonna get to a pitch where suddenly you can't hear anymore. But in some cases, actually, if the hair cells aren't damaged, that will just do the trick. You find the tone, you start listening to it, and then you give the nerve cells the external stimulus that they crave, and they get to carry on for a bit longer, so you can start to reduce the symptoms. If it is the case that those hair cells have been completely damaged, a couple of things that can be helpful. So some things that you might try is to, once you find the tone, try and find out the frequency and see if you can find something that vibrates with that frequency and apply it around or near your ear. Secondly, find an instrument, a musical instrument that can play that specific tone for you. And the advantage of those musical instruments is they tend to have a lot of different tones layered on top of each other. So even if you can't hear the high-pitched one that you're hearing with the tinnitus, if you can get all of the matching ones underneath it, sometimes that can do the job. So that's just one idea for if you're having if you're struggling, as I am to speak, with differentiating or with tinnitus, then you can look for playing the tone. If you just want to train your ability to hear tones, another thing that you can do is just take any two tones. So if you imagine, if you've got a guitar, this works really well to play two notes and just slightly bend one of the notes. Or if you don't have a guitar, just search for two tones that are very similar in frequency, and your job is to try and pick out which is the higher pitch. And obviously, if you're finding it really difficult, spread the tones further apart, you always just say which one is higher, which one is higher, which one is higher. The reason you're doing higher is, again, the high frequencies are the ones that die out first, so you're trying to tell your brain, these high frequencies, it's important for me to still be able to hear these. So you try to place your attention on the higher note rather than the lower, and then obviously the lower and lower, the more precise you can get with that, the better the rest of the brain will become at learning those tones. So 2 ideas for tone there. Next, we're going to move on to sensitivity. So after tone, sensitivity is probably the other bit that everybody will experience some level of hearing loss with. So it's not the differentiating the pitch, it's actually the volume that you hear things at. Things will not be so clear. It will be harder to physically hear things as you get older. So the ability to hear at reduced volume, a couple of things that can affect that. Number one, blockages in your ears. So definitely be aware if you haven't ever tried, any kind of drops or spray or anything to cleanse out some of the wax in your ears. Maybe it's something worth looking at, and you might be very surprised at how much you can change your hearing sensitivity just through that alone. Even if you have reduced hearing, that might actually do the trick to just get you a little bit above the threshold that you might like to be. Again, damage to the cilia, that if there's less hair cells available to pick up the sound, then that will be perceived as there's less sound happening, so it's probably quieter. Then the third thing is maybe it's not the cilia at all. Maybe it is the nerve, the cochlear nerve, that is supplying that information to the brain. So if it's not able to send a really strong signal to the brain, actually you might have reduced sensitivity to hearing as well as reduced clarity in that hearing. So that's going to be something that we can look at in a minute, because we can affect that in a few different ways, which is quite cool. Okay, so sensitivity can be greatly improved through standard training. One of the best ways, if you want to try it just now, take your fingers, pinch them together, and just rub them. Now, I don't know if you can hear that on the camera. I'll try to do it very close up to the microphone. All you're going to do is cover one ear, and with the other ear, you're just going to do that rubbing. Start nice and close, make sure you can hear it, and then just start moving it around and see what are the limits where you can still hear it at the same volume. If the sound disappears, then you want to hover in and out of that place. If you can hear everywhere, then just pay attention to the traveling. So just pay attention to where it's moving around. And that's just one way that you can start training the hearing sensitivity. Obviously, if you can hear it all the way out at arm's length, you might want to put a sound somewhere and start moving towards and away from it, so you can tell at what point does it go further and further, or does it get harder and harder to hear. But pay attention, no matter what you're doing, you can do this with both ears, or you can cover one ear and see, if there is one ear that's considerably weaker, often it's better to just train that one, because otherwise, if the hearing in one ear is going, then again, the brain says, I don't want to pay attention to getting shoddy information from this one, when I could actually use up that kind of real estate, the neurons that are supplying that ear. I could just hijack them and use them for the other ear. So sometimes if you have hearing that's much less on one side, your training probably just wants to be on that side as well. So that kind of standard training, it's not just rubbing. Feel free to do it with as many different sounds as possible as well, so you start noticing which types of things you can listen to really quietly and which you cannot. And finally, better doing this with your eyes closed, especially if it's speech or text, and if you've got it on a video. Lip reading and your visual system will do a lot of the work for you. Even if your eyes are just open in general, your body will be more relaxed. So if you can put yourself into a little bit more of a stressful state and then focus on the sensitivity, that will just up the load for your brain and hopefully help train it a little better. Okay, I forgot what I wrote next, so I'm just going to wait till it comes up. Oh yeah, so then the third thing that we want to do is to look at the cochlear nerve. So as I said, we might have the problem in the cilia, we might have blocked the ear physically, but a big component of training your auditory system is the cochlear nerve, the big nerve that brings all of that information into your brain. Is that actually providing enough signals? Is it doing it fast enough? And if the answer is no, we probably want to look at training that. Now, the best thing that you can do outside of just trying to train your sound, the next best thing that you can be doing is to train your balance, okay? And the reason for that is the cochlear nerve actually is a part of a larger nerve, the vestibulocochlear nerve. So that is one of the cranial nerves, lives in your brainstem. Its job is for hearing, but it's also for the other thing that lives on the inside of your ear, which is your balance systems. So any kind of balance work where you're improving your balance is likely, first of all, to add more electrical activity in that area, which means it's easier for the cochlear nerve to send signals down through to the brain. But secondly, it's also a possibility that maybe the cochlear nerve is trying to send sound signals to the brain, but because our balance is quite poor, the vestibular nerve is actually winning. So when we're trying to send a bunch of information down one highway, the brain is going to decide, well, which is more important? Is it important that I hear well, or is it important that I don't fall over and smack my head off something? And very often, almost, I guess all the time, it's the second one. So the vestibular nerve is going to get priority, and the way that you can stop it needing priority is to train it and have it have better quality input coming through from there. So if you can train up your balance, improve your balance, whether it's balancing on one foot with your head staying still or balancing somehow with your head moving, that is hopefully going to allow more input from the cochlear nerve. Similar jaw mobility, also similar brain regions, so it can have that effect. Also, jaw mobility occasionally can moving your jaw around can cause tissue changes that can loosen stuff up in the ears. So if there is a blockage, that can help, as well as similar things with the tongue. So one of the exercises that we can say with the tongue, if you take the tip of your tongue and push it right up in between your teeth and your lips, and then just draw circles all the way around, like you're trying to lick every single one of your teeth in order around in a circle and around the other way. Getting good, just doing that exercise a couple of times a day can also be useful. So not just training hearing, training balance, maybe jaw gliding, jaw moving around, and training the tongue, things that you can do in addition, and just monitor it and see, does it seem to be working. Okay, next up we've got space. So now we get into the stuff that is usually a little more overlooked. So like we said, as well as knowing what something is, our brain wants to know where things are in space, and that is because if you hear a sound, well, you're hearing a sound with both ears. How do you know if it came from the left or it came from the right? So one of your strongest reflexes, as I said, is your eyes want to look to one direction or the other. That's only going to be useful if you know which direction to look. If I hear a really big sound come from my right and I turn to my left, in a survival situation, that's me dead in seconds. It's not particularly helpful. So the way that the brain has dealt with this is it has made our ears into these weirdly shaped things. So the shape of our ears mean that different sound frequencies hit in different ways, and they will arrive in different ears at different times, and then that time delay allows the brain to pinpoint exactly where things are coming from. But it's not just the time delay. Your brain needs to learn that a specific time delay of a specific frequency correlates to something that is right in front of you or right behind you. So while the time delay thing is important, it also takes a bit of training as well. So this is one thing that you can train, but more importantly, first I will say, yeah, check for potential blockages, this time outside the ear. So if we think the shape of the ear allows us to hear, well, what happens if we start putting things in the way? So my hat is a pretty good example of if the hat is on versus off. It's very possible that that's going to cause a slight difference in the delays coming in. Maybe not because it's covering both sides, but I don't know, is the material different sides? I don't know whether my brain wasn't very good at differentiating certain positions anyway, so just by dulling down the input, that might change things. Ear piercings, for sure, especially if you've got piercings all the way up around the top, anything like that. And this isn't to say for definite it's gonna affect your ability to locate things, but if you found that actually you often couldn't tell where things are coming from and you have a lot of ear piercings, that is one thing that I would recommend to just check, is if you can take them out and does your location get better. Oftentimes if you do get a bunch of ear piercings that never come out, your brain will adapt to that, so you might find that you have just retrained your ability anyway, so it might not be such a big issue. But then again, are you then going and engaging in a physical activity where you've got to cover them up, or you've got to take them out, and is that actually causing you to suffer in terms of your coordination? Things like hair, any other accessories, just pay attention. Is it possible that that is affecting how the sound's getting to your ear? Because that might affect how you locate things. In particular, especially if you find difficulties at work, or you're wearing a specific uniform, that might change it, and that is totally possible. Finally, training sound location in space is another thing that you can just do. So you can look up on our YouTube channel, we have an exercise called tonotopic mapping, and that is just one that you can do. You drop something on the ground with your eyes closed, and you have to point to where it lands. It's quite basic. Obviously, if you're throwing something, you've got a kind of good idea of roughly where it's going to land. Even better if you can have somebody else make a sound and you locate it. You're going to be worse at pinpointing up versus down. You want to be better at left versus right. So most of the reflexes are to be able to discriminate what is more to your left, what is more to your right. So that's the most important bit. If you're really bad at up and down, definitely good to get better at that, but don't expect it to improve at the rate that left and right should. And again, if you improve your ability to hear things in space, you might actually find knock-on effects to the other things, the tone and the sensitivity, just because the more accurate the information, the brain sees it a better idea to pay attention. Finally, with training location and training tonotopic mapping in space, you want to be training this in as many environments as you can. So get good at it in one environment for sure to begin with. But if you're working in a specific environment, this studio, for example, everybody does worse in this studio with locating sounds, just because it's a quite small studio. The walls are a little bit echoey, so sound will echo around the walls very easily, which makes it much harder to locate something. That doesn't mean I can't train it though, so after a while people get good at doing it in this space. But what's more useful is if we have you good at locating things in the spaces that you're most often in, or if you're an athlete or you need hearing for your job, to train it in whatever kind of environment that you're working in, because open spaces, closed spaces, all of those kind of things can affect how you hear in space. Okay, finally, we've got discrimination. So not too much to say about this one. It's just your ability to pick one sound out and focus on that one sound over everything else. So all I've really got to say is this is also something that you probably don't want to ignore. So as well as you might improve your sensitivity to hearing, but that might require total silence and hearing certain, just focusing on can you actually hear anything or not. In discrimination, you actually want to raise the background noise and then see can you hear what's going on. So that might be in a crowded room, can you overhear one conversation over another? And while I'm not condoning eavesdropping on random strangers, something of that sort is exactly what I'm talking about. So maybe you play a movie but have some white noise or just background music, and you try your best to pick out the movie with the background noise at the highest volume you can. So see at what point can you not figure out what's going on. And again, this is better with eyes closed than eyes open. Secondly, if you're finding discrimination is really a problem, one of the other systems that you might want to work on is memory. So if you improve your memory, it improves your brain's ability to, like, first of all, remember what you're supposed to be focusing on, but also to discriminate between different sounds. And an exercise that I would recommend is imagine you've got a dialogue of two voices speaking. You want to remember all the information of one of the voices. So this is even better if they're providing, a list or something like that. So maybe it's every time one voice says a number, you've got to note it down in your head, and you've got to either add those numbers together or just produce the list of those numbers by the end. Every time another voice does it, you've got to say, block that out. I don't want to listen. I don't want the number in my head. And just have those two voices play back and forth. And you focus on, concentrate on this one, ignore this one, concentrate on this one, ignore this one, while trying to remember what is going on. Then later on, once you try the discrimination, try to hear something over a noise, usually you find it a little bit easier. Okay, so that went a little longer than I intended to. Just some very basic thoughts on hearing. As I said, it's not the be-all and end-all. It's something I recommend everybody do to just improve their ability to hear and improve their ability to move by getting better input into your brain. While it can be successful with hearing loss, just be aware, like I said, the cilia will get damaged. That's at the current time that we live in, that's an inevitability and something that we should be prepared to have happen to us. If you do go down the route of hearing aids and implants and things like that, just be aware that all of these things can still be trained using that equipment. So one of the big gripes of hearing aids used to be that it was very difficult to tell different sounds apart, and I know that's got much better in recent years, but training your brain to be able to pick certain sounds out of something, whether it's stereo or mono or anything, it can still be done. And while it might not be as good with the use of these different aids, it's still something that is possible to do. So worth looking into, regardless of whether you're just using your ears or whether you're getting additional help. Okay, hope all that made sense. Do let me know if you got any questions about that.